The word cracked through the terminal like a whip. "Liar!" Head snapped around as a flight attendant, face twisted with disdain, pointed at a black pilot in full uniform. The man stood frozen for a heartbeat, his captain's stripes gleaming on his shoulders, his eyes narrowing as dozens of passengers stopped to watch. A hush fell. Phones rose. Whispers rippled through the crowd. This wasn't just an accusation. It was humiliation, staged in front of strangers. A veteran pilot questioned as if he were an imposter in his own profession. But what no one expected was his next move. Because with one calm motion he pulled out his phone, made a single call, and within minutes the entire airport would see who was really lying. It hadn't always been this way. Long before the accusation that stopped an airport in its tracks, Captain Elijah Brooks had built a life defined by precision, discipline, and quiet pride. Born into a working-class family, he had dreamed of flying before he could even spell the word pilot. His father used to take him to the edge of the runway near their small town, where they'd watch planes roar into the sky. While other kids wanted toys, Elijah wanted wings. The path to the cockpit was brutal. He worked double shifts to pay for flight school, studied harder than anyone around him, and endured countless reminders that someone like him wasn't supposed to make it that far. Every simulator session, every check ride, every exam, he carried not just his own hopes, but the unspoken burden of proving that a black man could wear those captain's stripes. By the time he earned them, Elijah had logged thousands of hours in the air. He'd flown through lightning storms, mechanical failures, even an emergency landing that once made national headlines. Passengers clapped when he brought them home safe. Fellow pilots respected him. And yet, beneath the surface, he knew the truth. One wrong look, one prejudiced assumption, could still threaten to strip all of it away. That truth became painfully clear on a morning that should have been ordinary. Elijah had just walked into the terminal, luggage in hand, ready to brief his crew for a long-haul flight. The crisp uniform he wore was a symbol of years of sacrifice, but to one flight attendant, it wasn't enough. To her, his presence was suspicious, his authority, a threat. And in a single breath, with a single accusation, she would turn the calm order of the airport into chaos. The moment the word left her mouth, the atmosphere of the terminal changed. Passengers froze mid-step, their conversations died out, and suddenly all eyes were on Captain Elijah Brooks. He stood tall, his black uniform pressed to perfection, golden captain's stripes gleaming against the crisp fabric. Yet instead of respect, he was met with suspicion. The flight attendant's voice rang out again, sharper this time, slicing through the uneasy silence. "You don't belong here. You're not really a pilot." Gasps rippled through the bystanders. A child tugged at his mother's arm, whispering questions she couldn't answer. Phones were raised, red recording dots glowing like beacons. Elijah had spent years commanding cabins filled with hundreds of passengers, yet here he was, questioned like an intruder in his own domain. His pulse quickened, not from guilt, but from anger carefully restrained. He had seen this before, though rarely so blatant, and always knew it wasn't really about his credentials. It was about his skin. The flight attendant, emboldened by the murmurs around her, pressed on. She circled him like a prosecutor. "If you're really a captain, show us your ID, show us your clearance. Anyone can buy a uniform these days." Her smirk carried the weight of centuries of assumptions, that a black man in power must somehow be faking it, sneaking into spaces never meant for him. Elijah's jaw tightened. He could feel the passengers' stares, some sympathetic, some skeptical, all waiting for him to prove himself. He reached calmly into his pocket, pulling out his airline ID. The card glinted under the fluorescent lights, his name, photo, and title clearly visible, Captain Elijah Brooks. But instead of admitting her mistake, the attendant scoffed. "Could be fake." People forge these all the time. The tension mounted. A group of passengers began whispering loudly, debating whether to trust him. One woman muttered, "I just want to feel safe on my flight." Another man said, "If he's real, why is she so sure he's lying?" The narrative was slipping, bending beneath the weight of prejudice, and Elijah could feel it.
But he didn't
Truth
flinch.
being drowned outside, a storm raged. He thought of the countless nights studying charts by a dim desk lamp, the loans he took just to afford his first training flights, the disbelief he endured even in classrooms where he outperformed his peers. He thought of his father's pride when he earned his wings. All of it. All of those sacrifices, now belittled in a single moment by someone who refused to see beyond his skin. A nearby gate agent stepped forward hesitantly. "Ma'am, that's Captain Brooks." He's scheduled for this flight, but the attendant waved her off, her tone icy. "Don't defend him. This is about safety. If he's lying, everyone here could be at risk." Her words were a blade designed to cut at his credibility, to seed fear in the hearts of those watching. And fear was powerful. It could unravel a career in seconds. Some started filming closer, narrating their own biased takes, their voices echoing in the cavernous terminal. To them, it was drama. To Elijah, it was decades of progress hanging by a thread. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself. He had faced turbulence at 35,000 feet, yet this felt far more dangerous. Because here, his skill couldn't save him. Only truth, and the right kind of power, could. He slid his phone from his pocket, the screen glowing as he unlocked it. The attendant's eyes narrowed, mocking. "Oh, calling someone?" "Trying to cover your tracks." But Elijah didn't respond. His thumb hovered briefly, then pressed the contact labeled simply, CEO, Direct Line. He had earned that number years ago after successfully landing a troubled flight and being personally commended by the company's highest executive. Few pilots ever had it. She had no idea. The phone rang once, twice, and then a deep, commanding voice answered. Passengers leaned closer, whispering. The attendant folded her arms, convinced she still held control. But what none of them realized was that the moment that call connected, the power dynamic of the entire terminal was about to flip. Because in less than 5 minutes, the humiliation would not belong to Captain Elijah Brooks. It would belong to the woman who thought she could tear him down. The CEO's voice came through the phone, steady, commanding, and instantly recognizable. "Elijah, what's going on?" The sound alone was enough to silence the thunder in Elijah's chest. But he didn't answer right away, not because he was unsure, but because he wanted every single person watching to hear what came next. He switched the phone to speaker mode, holding it high enough for the surrounding passengers, the gate agent, and most importantly, the flight attendant, to hear. The flight attendant's smirk faltered, though she quickly tried to recover. "You think calling someone is going to scare me? That doesn't prove you're a real captain." Her words carried bravado, but her eyes flickered with unease. She had built her attack on the assumption that no one would question her. She was the attendant, the gatekeeper of order and safety, and surely people would believe her over him. But she hadn't planned on him carrying a direct lifeline to the very top of the company. Elijah finally spoke, his voice calm, deliberate, and heavy with suppressed fire. "Sir," he said into the phone, "I'm standing at gate 32. Your flight attendant here has publicly accused me of impersonating a pilot. She's told dozens of passengers I don't belong in this uniform. Even after showing credentials, she's still claiming I'm a liar." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The words "flight attendant" and "accused" seemed to linger in the air like smoke. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some looking away, ashamed they had even considered doubting him. Others leaned closer, drawn to the spectacle of truth, cutting through lies. On the other end of the line, the CEO's voice sharpened. "What's her name?" The attendant's face paled. She stammered, You can't just—" Elijah didn't hesitate. "It's printed on her badge. Everyone here can see it." He paused, locking eyes with her as he read the name aloud for the entire terminal to hear. Each syllable landed like a hammer. The silence that followed was unbearable. Passengers who had raised their phones earlier were now recording with renewed intensity, sensing that what they were capturing would become viral proof of justice in action. The CEO's voice returned, lower this time, but carrying the unmistakable weight of authority. "Captain Brooks, I want you to proceed with your flight preparations. As for the attendant, she's finished. She is not to step foot on another one of our aircraft again. Security will escort her out immediately." The terminal erupted. Gasps, murmurs, even a few cheers broke the tension. Passengers stared wide-eyed, whispering disbelief. A man who minutes earlier had doubted Elijah muttered to his wife, "He just called the CEO and got her fired." The flight attendant's bravado shattered. Her face flushed crimson, her lips trembling as the reality of what had just happened sank in. She turned wildly toward the passengers as though seeking sympathy, but none came. Her authority, her smug certainty, had evaporated in seconds. She had underestimated him. She had underestimated the cost of her arrogance. Security officers arrived, called not by her but by the voice that outranked them all. She tried to protest, her words tumbling out in desperate fragments. "It was just a misunderstanding. I was only—" But the officers did not listen. They flanked her, their hands light on her elbows, guiding her firmly. Her protests faded into nothing, replaced by the steady hum of whispers and the soft shuffle of luggage wheels across the polished floor. The crowd's gaze shifted back to Elijah, but this time there was no suspicion in their eyes. There was respect, even awe. Elijah stood silent for a moment, letting the weight of what had just unfolded settle. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't lashed out. He had simply spoken truth with calm authority, backed by a lifetime of excellence no prejudice could erase. His power had never come from the uniform. It had come from his resilience, his refusal to break even when the world tried to bend him. One young boy in the crowd tugged at his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, eyes wide, "I want to be like him." The father nodded slowly, his own face etched with a mixture of shame and admiration. For Elijah, that was the true victory. Not the firing of a woman who had tried to belittle him, but the spark he had ignited in someone young enough to still dream. A spark that said, "You belong. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." As the last echo of the attendant's footsteps faded into the distance, the gate agent approached, her voice hushed but trembling with admiration. "Captain Brooks, I'm so sorry you had to go through that, but thank you for handling it the way you did." He nodded, offering a faint smile. "It's not about how I handled it," he said softly. "It's about making sure it never happens again." And with that he lifted his luggage, straightened his shoulders, and walked toward the gate. The terminal, once thick with tension, now parted for him with quiet reverence. He was not just a man in uniform. He was proof that dignity, when protected fiercely, could outshine even the ugliest of prejudice. And in the silence he left behind, passengers were left to wrestle with a question that would linger long after their flights. How many times had they watched injustice unfold in silence, and what would they do the next time they saw it? When Captain Elijah Brooks finally walked through the jet bridge, the energy inside the aircraft was completely different from the chaos he had left behind in the terminal. Passengers sitting by the windows looked up, many of them recognizing him instantly. They whispered to one another, not with doubt this time, but with admiration. A few even clapped softly, their applause spreading like a quiet wave before fading back into the natural hum of boarding. Elijah gave a courteous nod but didn't linger. He knew his job wasn't about applause. His responsibility was the safety of the hundreds of lives about to sit under his care. He carried himself with the same quiet dignity he had held even when he was being humiliated. That was the difference between him and the woman who had tried to tear him down. His strength had come from within, not from authority abused. Up in the cockpit, he placed his cap on the seat beside him and ran a hand over the controls. They weren't just instruments of steel and wires. To him, they were proof. Proof of years of training, discipline, and sacrifice. Proof that he belonged here, not because someone gave him permission, but because he had earned every single stripe on his sleeve. Back in the terminal, however, the ripples of what had happened continued to spread. Passengers uploaded the videos they had captured, their captions filled with outrage and awe. Within hours, the clips would trend across social media. Flight attendant accuses black pilot of lying and loses her job on the spot. Millions would watch. Millions would share. But behind the virality was something far deeper. For the first time, people who had never questioned their own silent biases were forced to look at themselves. How quickly had they believed her? How easily had they doubted him, simply because of the color of his skin? The uncomfortable truth gnawed at them. Prejudice didn't always shout. Sometimes it whispered in the split-second judgments people made without even realizing it. For the airline, the incident was a public relations storm. Statements were issued, policies were reviewed, mandatory retraining was announced for all staff. But Elijah knew better than anyone that real change didn't come from press releases. Real change came from moments like this being remembered and retold. A week later, he received a letter, not from the company, but from a young boy who had been at the gate that day. The handwriting was messy, the words simple. "Dear Captain Brooks, I saw what happened to you. At first I thought maybe the lady was right, but then I saw how you stayed calm and told the truth. I want to be a pilot too. I won't let anyone tell me I can't." Elijah folded the letter and placed it inside his logbook. He didn't need awards or headlines. That letter was enough. It was proof that even in the ugliest of moments, dignity could be lifted off into the sky that evening. Elijah stared out over the horizon. The world below was divided by lines, race, class, power. But up here, above the clouds, everything was equal. And he carried with him a silent promise that as long as he wore the uniform, no one, no matter how arrogant or prejudiced, would ever strip away the honor he had earned. Because sometimes justice isn't just about punishing the guilty. Sometimes it's about showing the world that no matter how high the storm rises, the truth will always fly higher.